Calling Paula a dressmaker is like calling a Ferrari just a mode of transport. This was my first introduction to the woman I know as Paula Gubar. The Russian community in Brisbane remembers her as an exquisite craftsperson, a smart and entrepreneurial woman who worked hard and created beautiful works of art from fabric and thread. Paula Gubar was one of Queensland's most skilled dressmakers in the 20th century. Her clients included wealthy, high society types who could never be seen in the same gown twice, to wedding parties where Paula would dress the whole party, including interstate family, and create not just their ceremony outfit, but everything the wedding party wore that week, including the wedding night negligee. Paula's work was always of a very high standard, and so she became quite a famous dressmaker in Brisbane. So much so that the Russian ballet chose Paula to mend and sew their costumes when they were in town. Her expectations of herself were very high, and it showed in her work. No seam left unfinished, no dress without proper lining. Her garments were as beautiful on the inside as they were on the outside. Paula also became known for her detailed machine embroidery and precise cutwork. Paula's collection is now part of the Queensland Museum, kindly donated by her daughter Yvonne Webb for the Contemporary Queensland Fashion Designers exhibit. The Paula Gubar Collection, held in the Queensland Museum, comprises over 300 items. The collection includes Gubar's dressmaking tools, needlework tools, fabrics, women's and children's clothing, gowns, costumes, accessories, photographs, and business documents. I was lucky to be able to request a look at some of the items at the museum and speak with Assistant Curator Carmen Burton about the collection.
This kind of material is really significant to Queensland historically and culturally. Firstly, Paula was from Russia, so there's a really fascinating and really important migration story within this collection, which is really important to preserve and document. The second part is that she was a woman, so it's fantastic that women's stories from this period are preserved and told, and that Paula was very successful in her work as a dressmaker. So these are the kinds of stories that we hope to preserve and keep and tell for future generations.
Paula's story is included as part of the Women of Stephens Conference as a fascinating snapshot into Brisbane's high society during the 1930s, and as an example of the determination of Russian immigrants and the grit it takes to start a new life in a strange country. But there's another interesting element to her story. Paula Gubar lived in one of Moorooka's heritage-listed homes. To find out more about why her low-set Art Deco brick home ended up on the local heritage register, we'll have to find out more about her family and Brisbane's Russian community. Paula's Brisbane story begins with her arrival in 1925. Paula was about 13 years old when she made the journey to Brisbane by ship with her parents and two of her younger sisters. Her parents were Ukrainian landowners in Russia who saw a chance to start a new life in Australia after the end of the Russian Civil War, which established the Soviet Union. Father, Alexander Canuk, was attracted to the East Coast as land was opening up, but when the communists came, the family decided to leave. The whole family consisted of 6 daughters. Paula, Anna, and Elizabeth arrived with their parents. The 2 eldest of Paula's sisters, Alexandra and Tatiana, sadly remained in Russia to complete their university degrees. A third sister, Mary, was already in Brisbane. Mary had arrived earlier with her husband-to-be, who was a neighbour from Vladivostok. Mary and Timothy had visas to come to Australia and had settled in Brisbane. Mary helped as much as she could, arranging all the paperwork necessary for her family to enter Australia. And then the day after they arrived, the Canuk family attended Mary and Timothy's wedding. The Canuk family left from Vladivostok on the last day of 1924 and travelled to Shanghai, where they stayed for nearly 6 months, waiting for their immigration papers from Australia to be finalised. The trip to Brisbane continued via Nagasaki, Hong Kong, Manila, Thursday Island and Townsville, a trip of 7 months in total. Many other Russian families, soldiers, property owners and business people had arrived in Queensland between 1911 and 1917, when Queensland experienced its largest intake of Russian people. The Russian families who made it here from Russia or China ended up as small crop farmers, while others took up cane growing or became cane cutters and cotton pickers. They undertook exhausting work in unbearable heat and worked hard to create a community. Russians arriving in the mid-1920s settled in Brisbane, Childers, Biloela, Tully and Mount Isa. By 1930, there were approximately 40 Russian families in Brisbane. According to Paula's travel diary, she arrived in Brisbane on the 11th of July 1925 at 9 o'clock in the morning, and as a testament to the importance of education, she and Anna started school 10 days later with no knowledge of English in Kangaroo Point. Paula described Brisbane to her older sister in a letter. "I cannot say that Brisbane is a really big city. If you've just arrived to Brisbane from Russia, the houses in the city would seem to be very funny in your opinion. Houses here are not built in the Russian way. They bury big poles in the ground, then they build houses on top of the poles. Shops, banks, and all kinds of huge buildings they build the same way as it is in Russia. There's a very nice museum here in Brisbane. There are plenty of beautiful public parks and gardens and so on. We've already got used to it, and it seems to be just an average town for us." The Russian community was already well established in Brisbane. In 1923, the first Australian Russian Orthodox Church was formed in Brisbane at a small timber house in Vulture Street by a group of Russian refugees who came to Australia via China. A 1935 article in the newspaper described the opening of the Russian church. "This is a story of triumph over adversity. It is a story of struggles for over a decade of the small community of Russians in Brisbane to build for themselves a church that would hold for them all the things nearest to their hearts. It is a story of faith put to the test, of personal sacrifices and achievement that sprang from unwavering trust and perseverance. It is the story of a dream come true." Soon after the Canuk family arrived, Brisbane's local government curtailed Russian immigration based on concerns about Soviet agents in Australia. Paula didn't stay at school for very long. Her English was poor and it was extremely challenging to understand the teachers, let alone make friends. As a result, the idea of school was short-lived for both Paula and Anna. Paula left school and gained a job at Sterling Henry and Collishaw clothing manufacturers on Edward Street, and then, with Anna, at Borscht's clothing factory in Stanley Street near the Mater Hospital. Paula and Anna worked for very little money, but with education held in high regard and their father unable to support them, the girls together paid for their youngest sister Elizabeth to go to Brisbane Girls' Grammar. 3 years after their arrival, Paula's mother passed away from pneumonia. She was a very religious woman, but those ideations didn't necessarily extend to Paula. Alexander, Paula's father, took the girls to live in Oxley, across the road from his married daughter Mary and husband Timothy. There he kept bees in one of the first apiaries in the area. The Brisbane company Capilano bought his honey. Alexander wasn't able to help the girls financially, but the house at Oxley became a weekend meeting place for the whole family. Outside of her job, Paula and her sisters pursued ballet dancing, studying at Brenda McCullough's ballet school. Many family photos show Paula and her sisters in ballet costumes posing for the camera. Paula had already begun to design and make costumes for the many shows put on by the Brenda McCullough Dance School. The influencer of the day for young ballerinas worldwide was prima ballerina Anna Pavlova. Just 1 year after the Canuk family's arrival, Brisbane was lucky enough to have Anna Pavlova perform as part of her Australian tour in 1926 and 29. It was so exciting for the Russian girls to know that a Russian dancer so revered and admired all over the world chose to visit their new home in Brisbane. It was in the years following Anna Pavlova's visits that ballet teaching in Brisbane became firmly established. During the 1930s, after Pavlova passed away, Russian ballet companies continued to tour Australia. Another Brisbane girl to study with the Pavlova company was Peggy Chauncey. Peggy opened a school here in Brisbane, and Paula continued to design and make costumes for Peggy's school. This 1935 article mentions her involvement with Peggy Chauncey. For the recent presentation of an Egyptian ballet given by Peggy Chauncey's pupils, Paula Canuk designed the costumes. Peggy tells me that Paula was also commissioned to design some costumes for the Russian ballet when it was here. In fact, Paula was so good with her costuming skills, the visiting Russian ballet companies asked her to create and mend their costumes while they were on tour, and Paula even travelled to Sydney with them. Paula's collection, held by the State Library, includes programs from the Russian ballet and an autograph book signed by the dancers. During their 1934 visit, members of the Russian ballet company visited Peggy Chauncey's studios and gave dancers a lesson. During another visit, they stopped by the local Russian church. This wonderful photo shows the Colonel de Basil's Monte Carlo Russian ballet visiting St. Nicholas Cathedral and enjoying a cup of tea in the church hall after a Sunday service in 1937. It was during her time working at Borscht Clothing Factory in Stanley Street that Paula quickly rose through the ranks to become head of her section. Paula was lucky to have started to learn the dressmaking trade early and continued to advance her skills, which she would take with her into her own business venture. Paula was able to establish her own dressmaking business and open a shop at 577 Stanley Street in Woolloongabba, near the entrance to the Mater Hospital and close to Borscht's. Along with ballet costumes, Paula designed and made frocks, gowns, beachwear, costumes, millinery, as well as soft furnishings. The shop in Stanley Street made way for another workshop, which was also her home, at 10 Gibbon Street in Woolloongabba. At one time, she employed up to 3 other Russian girls and trained them as well. At the bottom of her street was the Coupon Furnishing Company. For them, Paula made exquisite bedspreads of embroidered satins. Paula made evening gowns to order for members of Brisbane's high society. Back then, the place to go was Cloudland. The dancers there gave many ladies the opportunity to dress up and, of course, be photographed. She would eventually specialise in intricate machine embroidery and cutwork, and her beautiful, precise work became very well known. In the early years of her career, Paula met and married fellow Russian Paula Gubar. Basil and his sister Catherine, along with her husband Gregory, were part of the Russian community from Harbin in Manchuria, China, prior to immigrating to Australia. In keeping with family tradition, Paula and Basil were married in the St. Nicholas Cathedral on Vulture Street in 1935. They were married by Reverend Victor Antoniev, who also officiated in the marriages of Paula's sisters. Anna, the youngest, was married to Victor Lalua in 1934, and Elizabeth in 1939 to Peter Morjanov. The Morjanov family were one of the founding families of the St. Nicholas Church, having assisted not only in the building of the new church, but also as members of the parish council and in the creation of the church's library. All 3 sisters and their husbands supported and fundraised for the new church, which was designed by their brother-in-law, Gregory Meek. The Morjanov father and son team operated a furniture manufacturing and French polishing company at 34 Annerley Road opposite the Mater Hospital. It later became Paragon Furniture. Paula and Basil moved into a Queenslander home at 10 Gibbon Street, Wollongabba, which became a social focus for fellow Russians. Gibbon Street is now almost unrecognisable, as the Gabba Central apartments and shops now take up the whole block and occupy the land where the Gubar Queenslander once stood. Their daughter Yvonne was born on the 12th of December 1941. There are many lovely photos of Yvonne and Paula in the photographic collection. Yvonne had many cousins to spend time with, and holidays at the beach were a lot of fun. The children particularly enjoyed the huge 3-humped slippery slide that was operated by Gregory Meek at Redcliffe. They visited the Gold Coast and Redcliffe, as most people did back then, for day trips and picnics. This photo was published in the Courier Mail and shows Paula and Yvonne with matching embroidered bathing suits which Paula had made out of cloth nappies during the Second World War shortages. Around 1955, Paula and Basil decided to move house and closed her dressmaking workshop in Wollongabba to move to their newly built house in Moorooka. Her sewing continued, but by request only. Paula's brother-in-law, Gregory Meek, was by now a fully fledged architect after putting himself through college. He designed and built their low-set brick house in Corsica Street. Gregory was making a name for himself in other parts of Brisbane. He had designed and built a very unusual home for himself and his family on McGregor Terrace in Bardon, locally known as the Fairy House. This house is built on an extremely steep hill and is a 3-storey A-frame house. People often marvelled at the fairy tale style of the house, with plaster cast ladies on the front, a shingle roof and beautiful arched doors. Gregory Meek was also involved in a couple of other designs, one of them being the Commono building in Redcliffe and another one belonging to Cloudland. Cloudland was Brisbane's premier entertainment venue and Australia's best ballroom. Meek was involved in the original design of Luna Park, as it was known in the beginning, and responsible for the design of the funicular railway which ran up the side of the hill from the tram stop on Breakfast Creek Road. The cable car took patrons up the hill to the rear of the ballroom. Plans for Luna Park were sidelined at the outset of World War II, mostly due to materials shortages, and after the war, the venue reopened as Cloudland Ballroom. It was the place to be seen on a Saturday night. The funicular railway was dismantled in 1962 to make way for a car park, and the Cloudland site was sadly demolished in 1982. The building the Russian community is most proud of, however, is the St. Nicholas Cathedral, which was also designed by Gregory Meek and funded by the community. The original timber house was moved to the back of the block on Vulture Street, and the new church was built at the front. The Morjanoff family had a lot to do with the construction of the church, and Gregory Meek also applied his artistic skills to some internal painting inside the church. Consequently, Paula's house in Moorooka is heritage listed, not necessarily because it's her house, but because it was designed by Gregory Meek, her brother-in-law. Paula passed away in 1993 and is buried at Toowong Cemetery along with her husband Basil. Her daughter Yvonne is an author and nutritionist and lectures in biographical writing. Her family still owns the Corsica Street home.